The storm raged like a scorned lover, tearing across the wild plains of the late 19th century West. Amos Tucker, a lone drifter, spurred his tired horse toward the dim flicker of Clara's Haven, a lonesome boarding house squatting in the heart of nowhere. Rain clung to his leather coat, molding it to the hard lines of his shoulders. His dark eyes narrowed against the deluge. All he craved was a dry bed, a warm meal, a fleeting escape from the trail to Redstone. But as he tethered his horse to the sagging porch, two women watched from the window, their forms soft and shadowed in the lamplight. Clara, ripe and knowing at 45, leaned forward, her worn dress hugging the curve of her hips, her smile a slow, teasing a promise that didn't reach her sharp eyes. Ellie, younger, her blouse slipping low as she bent over her sewing, revealed the smooth swell of her chest, her fingers trembling, her gaze flickering with a fear that seemed to beg for rescue. The air held a bitter edge, not just rain, but something sinful, something deadly. Amos's hand hovered near his gun, his pulse quickening under their stares. This wasn't a haven. It was a snare, baited with honeyed lies and forbidden allure. Could a man seeking refuge resist the pull of such dangerous beauty? If this tale of temptation and treachery in the Wild West pulls you in, drop a like, tell us where you're listening from in the comments, and subscribe to ride deeper into stories of desire and redemption. Amos Tucker pushed through the door of Clara's Haven, rain dripping from his hat. The ache of 3 days' riding sunk deep into his bones. The parlor was small, lit by a fire that crackled like a warning, the air heavy with secrets too thick to breathe. Clara moved toward him, her faded blue dress hugging the sway of her hips, each step a slow dance that pulled his gaze despite the caution in his chest. "A man like you needs warming," she said, her voice low, honeyed, as she poured whiskey from a chipped decanter. Her fingers brushed his, deliberate and warm, sending a spark through him, stirring memories of nights long gone, before grief had carved his heart hollow. Ellie sat by the hearth, her blonde hair catching the fire's glow, her blouse slipping low as she bent over her needlework, revealing the soft curve of her chest. Her hands fumbled, the needle pricking her finger, and she gasped, pressing the blood to her lips, her eyes meeting Amos's, wide, trembling, like a doe caught in a snare. Was she trapped here, or playing a part? The memory of his brother, bleeding out on a moonless night, flashed through him, and Amos gripped the whiskey glass, forcing the pain down. "You've ridden far, haven't you, stranger?" Clara asked, leaning close, her breath warm against his ear, carrying lavender and a sharper, bitter edge. "Redstone, you said. Long road for a man alone." Her words were soft, but her eyes were sharp, hunting for cracks in his armor. Amos nodded, voice steady. "Just passing through. Need a bed, some food." He sipped the whiskey, tasting the faint burn of something wrong. Poison, like the kind he'd survived in Nevada, when claim jumpers thought they'd bested him. Ellie's needle slipped again, clattering to the floor. Clara's smile tightened, her tone cutting. "Careful, girl. Can't ruin Mrs. Carver's lace." The name struck Amos like a blade. J. Carver, the merchant whose vanishing had led him here, chasing whispers of missing travelers. Ellie flinched, her gaze darting to a door at the back, and Amos's gut twisted. This place was no haven. It was a trap, dressed in warm light and soft promises. Clara's hand grazed his arm as she cleared the table, her touch bold, lingering, stirring a hunger he'd buried deep. He was a man too long alone, and her closeness tugged at him, tempting him to forget the danger. But the weight of his brother's death, The guilt of failing to save him kept Amos grounded. He set the glass down, pretending ease, though his fingers stayed close to his gun. Whatever game these women were playing, he'd need more than whiskey to survive it. Amos sat at the scarred wooden table, the stew before him steaming, its scent heavy with beef and a bitter edge that made his throat tighten. Clara hovered close, her movements slow as she ladled more into his bowl, the curve of her waist catching the firelight, her dress pulling tight across her hips with each step. "Eat up, Amos," she purred, her voice curling around his name like smoke. "A man needs his strength in this wild country." Her fingers grazed his wrist, warm and teasing, and for a moment, Amos felt the pull of her closeness, a hunger he'd buried beneath years of solitude. But the memory of poison in Nevada, the burn of betrayal, kept his hand steady. He spooned the stew, letting it drip back into the bowl when her eyes weren't on him, his pulse quickening, not just from danger, but from the way her gaze lingered, promising sin. Ellie stayed by the fire, her needlework trembling in her hands, the fire's glow tracing the soft line of her throat as she bent low, her blouse slipping just enough to reveal the gentle swell beneath. She pricked her finger again, a soft gasp escaping, and Amos caught her eyes, pleading, haunted, like she was screaming without sound. Was she a victim, or was she bait? His brother's face flickered in his mind, the blood pooling on that dusty road, the weight of failing him pressing harder now. He pushed the bowl away, feigning fullness. "Mighty fine, ma'am, but I'm more tired than hungry." Clara's smile didn't falter, but her eyes narrowed, sharp as a blade. "Tired, are you? We'll fix that. Room's upstairs, clean and ready." She moved to the sideboard, her hips swaying, the faint rustle of her dress loud in the quiet. Ellie's needle fell again, and this time she didn't pick it up. Instead, she slipped a small notebook into a crack in the wall, her movements quick, desperate, before Clara turned back. Amos saw it, his gut twisting. That wasn't the act of a frightened girl. It was deliberate, calculated. "Clara's got away with guests," Ellie said softly, her voice barely above a whisper, her eyes locked on Amos for a heartbeat too long. The words felt like a warning, but her gaze held something else. Fear? Yes, but also a spark of defiance. Clara laughed, high and forced, cutting through the tension. "We don't get many travelers out here, Amos." "Makes a night like this special." She leaned closer, her hand resting on the table near his, her fingers brushing the edge of his sleeve, the touch sending a jolt through him. He wanted to pull away, but the warmth of her skin, the curve of her body so close, tugged at the loneliness he'd carried too long. Then it came, a faint creak from the back door. Not the wind, but boots on wood. Amos's hand slid toward his gun, his senses sharpening. Clara's smile froze, and Ellie's eyes darted to the door, her breath catching. The firelight flickered, casting shadows that danced like ghosts. And Amos knew. Whatever trap this was, it was closing fast. He stood, pretending to stretch, his voice calm. "Reckon I'll see that room now." Clara nodded, her eyes never leaving him, but as she led him toward the stairs, her hand brushed his back, low and intimate, a promise of danger wrapped in desire. His heart pounded, not just from the threat, but from the ache of wanting what he couldn't trust. What had he walked into, and could he walk out alive? Amos climbed the narrow stairs, each step creaking under his weight, his legs heavy from the trail, but his mind sharp as a blade. Clara led the way, her silhouette swaying in the dim lamplight, the hem of her dress brushing her calves, revealing a glimpse of smooth skin above her boots. She glanced back, her eyes catching his with a slow, knowing smile that stirred a fire in his chest, one he fought to smother. "Second door on the right," she murmured, her voice soft as velvet, her fingers trailing along the banister, inviting him to follow too close. The air was thick with the scent of old wood, and something sharper, like the poison he'd tasted in the stew below. His brother's dying plea echoed in his skull. "Don't fail again." And Amos gripped the railing, forcing his focus. The room was small, too clean for a place this remote, the bed made with crisp sheets, the wash basin gleaming. Clara lingered in the doorway, her body half-turned, the curve of her breast outlined by the lamplight as she leaned against the frame. "Rest well, Amos," she said, her voice a low promise, her gaze holding his like a trap. He nodded, his throat tight, the pull of her nearness warring with the warning in his gut. She stepped closer, her hand brushing his chest, fingers lingering on the damp leather of his coat, and for a moment he let himself feel it. The warmth of her touch, the ache of years alone. His hand caught hers, not to hold but to stop, his voice rough. "Obliged, ma'am. I'll manage." Her smile flickered, but before she could speak, a glint under the bed caught his eye. A silver ring, engraved with J. Carver. His blood ran cold. Carver the merchant gone missing with a fortune in gold. Amos dropped to one knee, his fingers closing around the ring. Then a crumpled letter tucked behind the washstand, its words scrawled in haste. "Tell my girls I'm coming home." The weight of it hit him like a fist. Memories of his brother's lifeless eyes flooding back. The guilt of failing to save him. This room wasn't a haven. It was a tomb. Clara's breath hitched, her hand stilling on his shoulder, and Amos knew she'd seen him find it. The air shifted, charged with danger. Her closeness no longer a lure, but a threat. "You're a curious one," she whispered, her voice sharp now, her body pressing closer, the swell of her hips grazing his side as she leaned in, her lips near his ear. His pulse hammered, desire and dread twisting together. But before he could pull away, a sharp crack split the night. Boots on the porch, heavy and deliberate. Ellie's voice came from downstairs, high and strained. "Clara, they're here!" The words broke the spell, and Clara stepped back, her face hardening. Amos stood, his hand on his gun, the ring clutched tight in his fist. Through the window, he saw lantern light moving in the rain, shadows of men circling the house. Clara's eyes locked on his, no longer soft, but cold as steel. "You should have eaten the stew," she said, turning for the door, her dress swishing, the curve of her form still pulling at him, even as his heart roared with betrayal. The stairs creaked below, voices low and rough. Men not here for talk. Amos moved to the window, his vision sharp despite the whiskey's lingering haze. The letter in his hand felt heavier than the gun at his hip, a reminder of the lives lost here, of the brother he couldn't save. He'd walked into a trap, but he wasn't prey. Not yet. The door downstairs slammed open, and a gravelly voice growled. "Where's the drifter?" Amos pressed himself against the wall, the ring biting into his palm. Whatever came next, he was cornered, and the fire Clara had kindled in him was about to meet the cold steel of survival. Amos pressed against the wall, the cold wood grounding him as the voices downstairs grew louder, boots thudding like war drums. The ring in his fist burned with the weight of Carver's lost life, and his brother's dying gasp echoed in his ears, urging him to act. Through the window, lantern light bobbed in the rain, men circling like wolves, their shadows sharp against the storm. Clara's footsteps faded down the stairs, her earlier warmth now a venomous lie. But the memory of her touch, her hips grazing his, her breath hot against his ear, still lingered, a distraction he couldn't afford. He needed to move, to live, to make this right. He crouched, checking his revolver, its familiar weight steadying his trembling hands. The poison's bitter tang still clung to his tongue, but he'd dodged its full grip thanks to that Nevada night when he'd learned to trust his instincts. The floorboards creaked below, and a gravelly voice, Snake Dillon they called him, snarled, "He's upstairs!" "Should be out cold by now." Amos's lips tightened. Not yet, he thought, sliding toward the bed to search for more clues. His fingers found a leather pouch, heavy with gold coins, and a blood-stained letter, Carver's words pleading for his daughters. The guilt of failing his brother surged, but Amos shoved it down, replacing it with resolve. He'd end this tonight. A soft sob broke the silence, not from Clara, but Ellie, her voice muffled through the floor. "I didn't want this," she cried, raw and broken. "They've got my father's badge, Clara. They'll kill me too." Amos froze, his heart lurching. Was she trapped, or was this another layer of the trap? Her trembling gaze from earlier, the notebook she'd hidden, it didn't add up for a willing accomplice. He needed to know, but the heavy tread on the stairs told him time was short. The door handle turned, slow and deliberate. Amos slipped behind the door, his gun raised, every muscle taut. Snake Dillon stepped in, a hulking figure with a coiled rope in one hand, lantern in the other, his scarred face twisted in a sneer. "Where's the bastard?" he muttered, not seeing Amos in the shadows. With a surge of desperation, Amos swung his gun, cracking it against Snake's skull. The lantern crashed, oil spilling across the floor, and flames leapt up, greedy for the dry wood. Chaos erupted, shouts from below, boots pounding, the fire spreading with a roar. Amos staggered to the window, the heat licking at his back, smoke curling into his lungs. He fumbled the latch, his fingers clumsy but driven, and swung the window open to a rush of cold, rain-soaked air. The porch roof was a 12-foot drop, a gamble, but the flames were closing in. Below, Ellie's voice cut through the storm, sharp with anguish. "Let me go, Clara!" she screamed, and Amos saw her in the firelight, struggling as Clara dragged her toward the horses, her blouse torn, revealing the curve of her shoulder, her body taut with defiance. Clara's hand struck her, hard, and Ellie fell to her knees, her sob piercing Amos's chest like a bullet. He couldn't leave her. Not like he'd left his brother. The fire was a wall now, blocking the door, but it gave him cover. He climbed onto the roof, the shingles groaning under his weight, and dropped to the mud below, pain shooting through his shoulder. The storm masked his fall, but lanterns swung closer, men shouting. "He's out!" one yelled. Amos rolled behind a water barrel, his gun slick with rain, his eyes locked on Ellie. Clara yanked her up, snarling, "Move, you little fool, or you'll burn with the rest." A shot rang out, splintering the barrel near Amos's head. He returned fire, his aim wild from the poison's lingering haze, but it bought him seconds. He moved, low and fast, using the smoke as cover, his heart pounding with the need to reach Ellie. She wasn't just a victim. She was the key, and he'd be damned if he let Clara take her. The flames devoured the house, casting an orange glow over the chaos, and Amos knew. This was his last chance to save her, to save himself, to make right the ghosts that haunted him. But as another shot cracked through the night, closer now, he realized the trap was tightening, and the truth about Ellie was about to change everything. The rain fell harder now, a cold curtain over the smoldering ruins of Clara's haven, the flames hissing as they died. Amos crouched in the mud, his shoulder throbbing, the revolver heavy in his hand. Ellie, no, Laura Grayson, stood a few paces away, her blouse clinging to her frame, the curve of her waist sharp in the firelight as she held a gun steady on Clara. The older woman knelt, blood seeping from her shoulder, her face twisted with rage, but drained of fight. "You've ruined everything." Clara spat, her voice brittle, The once seductive sway of her body now slumped in defeat. Laura's eyes, no longer trembling but fierce, met Amos's, and in that moment he saw her truth. A deputy U.S. Marshal, 2 months deep in a lie, carrying the weight of her father's death, a badge stolen by the same hands that built this trap. "I was waiting for you," Laura said, her voice steady despite the storm, her grip on the gun unwavering. "Every night, watching them plan, knowing I couldn't break cover until I had enough." She pulled a badge from her torn blouse, identical to the one hidden in Amos's saddlebag, its gleam a quiet defiance. Amos nodded, the guilt of his brother's death easing just a fraction. She'd saved him, not just with her shot, but with her courage, her sacrifice, mirroring the one he'd failed to make years ago. He stepped forward, binding Clara's wrists with rope from the wreckage, his hands brushing Laura's as she handed him the cord. The touch was brief, electric, a fleeting connection between two souls, scarred by loss. "You carried that alone," he said, his voice rough, eyes tracing the resolve in her face, the soft line of her jaw set hard against the rain. "Not anymore." Laura's lips curved, a ghost of a smile, but her eyes held the weight of every victim she couldn't save. The horses stood nearby, laden with stolen goods. Gold, jewelry, Carver's letter to his girls, evidence to bury Clara's network. Amos and Laura mounted up, Clara tied behind them, her curses lost to the wind. The trail stretched ahead, leading to justice, to answers for families left waiting. Amos glanced at Laura, her soaked figure upright, the fire's dying glow catching the strength in her posture. He'd come seeking shelter, but found something more, a partner, a purpose, a chance to mend the broken pieces of his past. As dawn broke, painting the horizon gold, they rode toward town, the ashes of Clara's haven fading behind them. A single hawk circled above, its cries sharp against the quiet, a symbol of freedom hard won. Amos felt the weight of his brother's memory lighten, not gone but shared, carried now by two who'd faced the dark and lived. If this tale of grit and redemption stirred your heart, drop a like, share where you're writing from in the comments, and subscribe for more stories of the Wild West. A super thanks keeps these trails alive, bringing you deeper into the frontier's untamed soul.